Welcome back, peeps, to Purrfect.dev, where we give you cats the freshest dose of dev snacks.
Now with your amazing hosts, Alex Patterson and Brittany Postma. This episode is sponsored by Builder.io. Visually build on your tech stack. Hey, today we have Ryan Carnit. I always mess up your last name. I'm going to let you say Carniato?
Yeah, Carniato.
Okay. I was like, oh no, it's always on camera when I mess it up. Cool. So Ryan's on the show today to talk all about JavaScript performance, but a lot probably on Solid.js as well. Welcome, Ryan.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Do you want to kind of tell a little bit more background about yourself, kind of where you work and why you created like Solid.js?
Sure. Solid.js was actually a project that I'd started at my previous employment. I was working in a startup, and we were a knockout shop, basically. The whole stack would go knockout. And actually, I didn't realize this at my time of employment, but the COO, the kind of my boss, the guy in charge, he was the writer of a framework called Knockback, which kind of combined Knockback and Knockout together to be like a full front-end framework. And through that, I got into open source and whatnot, just because simply like our whole stack was kind of custom. This is 2012 kind of time period, and before GraphQL, before React, and I suddenly found myself, basically, working on these open source libraries. And I'm not gonna lie, I kind of wasn't stoked. I wanted better docs. I wanted I was like, why? When there's a problem, I don't like that I have to go look in the code and inspect it and stuff. But I mean, I really didn't have much of a choice. See, before that, I'd worked at a Microsoft shop, and I was used to using I was doing JavaScript and Knockout, but I was also doing .NET, and everything was by the book. You had these great resources. So it was uncomfortable for me at first. But the funniest thing is, well, it's not funny, actually. Sorry. He kind of ended up, kind of burning out, overworking, and I was suddenly left kind of almost in charge on the technical side of the startup. So I was left with this open source stack that I was maintaining more or less, and over time we had to update it and improve it, and change libraries and kind of keep them up to date. And Solid was just born out of that. We really liked Knockout. We liked the if used well, we liked how it worked. And when React came around, we were just like, oh, we got web components. We have reactive state. We don't need React. And to be fair, over time, maintaining your own thing is a lot of work. Yeah. But I was like, okay, we can do this better. We can have a better Knockout, and that's essentially how I got started on Solid.js. It was just my own time project that maybe one day my startup would use. And as I often tell in the story, fast forward a few years to 2018, and I'm head of technology or whatever at the startup, doing my thing, and we've got to make the choice. And we've been maintaining our own stack for 6 years or something. And when the choice came, I kind of guided people, pushed them towards using Preact in the end. So, and ironically, it was right on the hook boundary, suspense time period. So we actually ended up using React ultimately after that whole thing, because we needed to deliver our product, and that's how it worked. But in any case, because of this, I did come up with Solid.js, and it was almost kind of like a way of proving that my favorite paradigm still worked in a post-React world.
Nice. Yeah. So I'm kind of curious, as we start to get into the Solid.js, there's a lot of kind of switch in our environment, especially on the front end these days, with going from more of a kind of load up your framework, it can do anything and everything, to let's not put as much JavaScript out there, or let's kind of keep the JavaScript out of the browser until we need it type of thing. And one of the craziest parts about Solid.js that I've seen is the performance side of that. I'm going to bring up the main page real quick. Maybe real quick. Here we go. So on the Solid.js page, you actually have two different metrics on here. So yeah. There's this kind of time metric. So that has over the course of time, load time, I assume, right?
This one's actually an averaged time from the JS framework benchmark. This is one of my favorite benchmarks. It actually measures mostly actually render time, update time. It's actually one of the few benchmarks that's not actually based on load time. It's actually based purely on like runtime performance, like while the thing's already loaded in the browser.
Oh, okay, cool. And then the other side of that, the search results side, that so this is this amount of nodes that it has or operations altogether?
Yeah, this is operations per second. This is an
Okay.
example where we just throw, which one is that? Is that the color picker? No, it's the search results. So basically, the guys from eBay had made this benchmark a couple years ago, and it essentially was like a copy of a search results page from eBay, essentially, where you
Okay.
had like a listing of search results you had to show. It had a header and a absolutely massive footer full of links and all the like typical legal stuff, like the big blob. So it's just like a very large traditional kind of static e-commerce site. I mean, there's some interactivity with the list and stuff, but it's a largely static site. And yeah, this is just like how many operations per second can you just jam the string rendering on the. I call it string rendering. Not everyone uses string rendering, but rendering. This is SSR speed.
Okay.
Operations per second. Yeah.
So if we were to take and like drop just JavaScript down there, would we see a big difference between that?
It's hard to say. I've been trying. The solid implementation is about as close as I could get. I imagine if it was just the string rendering, we could probably shave off. Like this one's, you notice how it's almost exponential. Generally speaking, you're as slow as your slowest bottleneck, and
Sure.
It's really hyper exaggerated on the server rendering. So I wouldn't be surprised in this example if vanilla JavaScript was maybe not double solid, but maybe like like significantly faster still, maybe like 30 or 40% faster. But so that kind of helps with the scale a bit in terms of where like some of the VDOM libraries like React or Preact are versus where you start getting into like Svelte and Marko and Solid, which are use their compiler that turns stuff into optimal string operations.
Yeah, so if like I'm glad we're looking at the Svelte side of this. If you were to look at Svelte, like that's more of a pre-compiled thing, right? So as that kind of hits the browser side, whereas Solid.js actually runs on the browser and the server side as well. When we talk about like Svelte performance, is it actually like the Svelte like before it arrives at the browser?
I think there's a lot of confusion around Svelte in general. I mean, because like all in certain aspects, Svelte, like the whole experience is compiled, and the same is true of Marko as well, where like your actual like your whole component, your view code, your like the lets and the counts and everything, these are all compiled. Where in Solid we only transform the JSX, but there's still a runtime behind it. There's still this kind of execution model, and what you're seeing here in the server rendering example is that Svelte takes its templates and changes them into like just strings essentially and adds them together. And on the server, we don't need reactivity. So Svelte actually just leaves its lets and consts and everything alone mostly on the server, and it just passes straight through. In Solid, we actually have to do something a little smart, where I actually have a different version of the runtime that turns all your functions into basically empty functions. Like there's no reactivity, and that's sort of how we do it. And we use some tricks to basically import the right version of Solid for the right environment. But essentially, there is a server runtime, and there is a browser runtime, and there's a server compilation target and a browser compilation target, and that's true of Svelte, Marko, and Solid. All three of those on the end there.
Gotcha.
So,
very cool. So yeah, we brought up Marko too, and I should probably state, like, are you still with eBay? Like, let's talk about that for a minute. You've worked on Marko for quite some time, right?
No, actually, that's the funny thing. They found me because of Solid. I was working on Solid, and I was kind of happy doing my thing. Maybe my startup will use it one day, and then I was like, oh, I want to benchmark it, so I open sourced it. And this is around right at the beginning of 2018. I think I open sourced it. I'd already been working on it, for a couple of years, kind of on and off, trying different stuff. And then I was happy with benchmarks. We were doing really good already. Like Solid's been kind of at the front of those benchmarks since like the beginning of 2018. I guess it's basically been 4 years. And essentially React hooks came out, and I was like, oh my god, people might actually use my library, because I didn't think people would go for those kind of primitive hook-like things before React hooks came out. I was happy using them, but I didn't think others would be happy. And the funny thing is, once I saw that, I just started writing article after article about my experiences and how I went about building this and planning it. And I just wanted to kind of get it all out there in terms of my thought process and justification, because I figured I'd need to justify a framework at some point.
Sure.
And during that process of writing those articles, I started kind of touching wider, because I do a lot of benchmarking, which got me familiar with a lot of frameworks. And the guys on the Marko team were like, I think this solves a problem that we've been having, that we've been trying to work on. They'd already kind of theorized a bit, but they were like, we don't, and you brought this up earlier, we don't want to send all the JavaScript to the browser. And our current system uses components, which are hierarchical, which means once you hit that component, well, then that is stateful, or has state in it. We have to send the whole rest of the tree down from that point down. And they're like, we don't want to do that. How do we solve that problem? Well, we get rid of the components, which is kind of like the secret that Solid has. So I joined up pretty quick once those guys reached out to me, because I didn't realize much about Marko. I wasn't really into server-side rendering that much. I was into like client-side performance, and I made many demos and benchmarks. You see where Solid was outperforming even server-side rendered apps in certain in a lot of benchmarks, even like first paint and stuff, just simply with some dynamics in terms of the way that people tend to block on the server before sending responses back. But the Marko team had crazy innovated in their area, which is streaming and this ability not to send all the JavaScript. And it was kind of, I just couldn't believe it existed. And then they're like, yeah, no, we've been doing this for like years, like 2013, 2014. And I was just like, how does this exist and not know about it? So I got right in there, and I was just like, I was learning everything, and it helped influence our solution for Solid server rendering, which was something I was just getting into. And the team there, we're working on the next version, which is Marko 6, and it's basically taking these lessons. It's taken a little while to come out, but it's taking these fine-grained approaches to performance and hydration and applying it to a really smart compiler. So kind of like Svelte, if Svelte could do hooks, essentially.
Okay. And let me bring this up real quick. So this is kind of Marko, if you've never heard of it, which it's still amazing. Marko's been around a long time. eBay's used it for a long time, right? And yet, like, anyone I talk to, they're like, what's Marko? So it's kind of one of these funny frameworks that's around, and it's cool that you're working on Solid.js and along with the Marko team and kind of putting these different pieces together. What I'm kind of curious about, though, when we talk about shifting to like this sending JavaScript to the browser, like, is that where the performance should be in the future as well? Like, should we try to get frameworks out of the mix on the web, or are we asking too much? Like, they've provided us so many tools over the years, and now we're kind of all talking about let's pull away from this. Like, how can we get less in there? Do you find that like that is easier, or is that more difficult?
Yeah, I mean, this is another
question.
Yeah, this is another area where it's challenging to know where the nuance is, like where the pattern's going to fall in, because like if you go back far enough, I mean, not even back that far, we were primarily building multi-page apps that rendered on the server,
Right.
and then you would just go like, oh, give me a little JavaScript here. I need this button to click, and
then we went the other way, right? The pendulum went, let's put it all in the browser. It can handle it, to the like Angular world, right?
Exactly. And the funny thing is, at different points in the past, there has been attempts to try and make a hybrid. And one thing that's been almost definitive in all the times to make hybrids has been it's been very clunky. And that's usually what precipitates the change to the opposite pendulum, because and the reason I'm bringing this up is because, like, let's say .NET or Java, but I'm going to use .NET because I was familiar with this. They tried to make it so that you could have more interactive JavaScript in the browser on their backend, but they hid it behind, you'd write C# code that would generate JavaScript. So you'd have this full isomorphic experience where you wrote all your components in your C#, and you had stuff that would do JavaScript requests in the background and update quickly instead of like doing the full page reloads and all that stuff. But it was the biggest convoluted mess of data sending and like serializing the state back and forth. It got really nasty. And like that at that peak, it was almost like a no-brainer. We knew we needed the interactivity, so we went really hard that way, and then just bloated right out. And then it was like people like, why can't I just use JavaScript? And then the rise of the single page app, and the pendulum goes the other way. Now the apps are completely in it. The challenge is that even though our techniques are getting better, like better lazy loading, better code splitting, and all that kind of approaches, but the interesting part is, while I don't think we go back to like server rendering everything. It is clunky. You rely a lot on the network. At least that's not like what we're proposing. I think a lot of the new technologies coming out, they go completely there. You want client-side interaction. You want JavaScript to be able to do some rendering on the page. This isn't like pure, I don't know, people familiar, Rails Turbo Link plus Stimulus or whatever, like Hotwire from DHA. We're not talking about that extreme. But there is fundamental concerns with single page app frameworks for a lot of use cases. The problem is, it wasn't that single page apps didn't succeed at what they did. We were trying to get a mobile experience. Mobile native was getting very popular, and people like were using it on all their phones. And like, I feel like single page apps came out largely of like, okay, we need that nice mobile experience. We need that native-esque feel to our experience. We need to have it all there at our fingertips. And like a native app, you don't mind installing it. Like there's some upfront cost. It wasn't a big deal. But the problem is, everyone started actually really enjoying building apps in that paradigm. So they continued to, and they were like, okay, well, actually, maybe I'll just use this for my blog site, or maybe I'll use this for my content site, and maybe I'll use this for my e-commerce site, which actually cares about page loading. Oh no, like, and that kind of shift is why we want to get more out of it, and why I think government sites and other places where you don't always have as much JavaScript, or you can't depend on devices, and like there's a ton of use cases where a single page app architecture can do the job, but then you're like, maybe this isn't the right job. And I think the interesting part with this whole thing is, if we are going to pull some stuff back to the server, the one thing that I've seen consistently when I've been looking at these frameworks and talking to people is, it's not just fixing single page apps. Like there has been some talk, and people are like, let's do better lazy loading or better code splitting. Even the people who've come up with some of the best ways of doing that, like Quick is amazing on the lazy loading code splitting story, in terms of like a technology that can really minimize that cost. But even when you talk to them, they're still like, no, we route on the server, or like, and this is the kind of shift we're seeing, where even though we know intrinsically we don't want to be doing full page unloads, we don't want to lose our state in the browser, we want to be able to make an application, something that persists, that can transition nicely with JavaScript in terms of animations or CSS. We want those aspects. But at a certain point on the single page app spectrum side of the things, you just have these pieces that you can't get rid of. Like things around, you need data fetching libraries and caches and routers that can do complicated orchestration. And these things, once you have them in the browser, well, they're in the browser, like, and they have a real cost. So regardless of any attempts you can do to try and downscale and code split it, these things need to be there, unless they don't. And that's sort of where the mentality shift is. It's like, well, can we pull those key things, those things that are just like, you need it to get started, like 100% need to be there, state management, all that stuff. Can we just pull some of that stuff to the server again, but keep our ability to have smooth transitions in the browser? And that's sort of where things are heading. This is not like pure server rendered, Rails app, as I was saying. This is like a new form of hybrid. This is where we load the JavaScript we need for interactivity and a little bit for orchestration, but we let the server do the heavy lifting. I think that's where things are heading.
Yeah, so you mentioned Quick, and the Builder.io team is putting out Quick. So I'll pause a minute for our advertisement here for Builder.io. Today's podcast is brought to you by Builder.io, visually building the web. Builder.io has one of the most powerful visual editors in the industry. Unlike other tools, Builder actually produces the code for you. You don't have to completely switch out your framework either, just use one of the handy SDKs that are available. There's no limits to what you can build. Instead of limiting your marketing team, start to optimize and let them do the work. This will allow your web developers to get back to the hard work that it takes for other components, allowing your team to do A/B testing and personalization. Stop worrying about bugs in production. Just use the site as it is, then you can analyze and start converting all of your customers with Builder's built-in heat maps. Stop limiting your growth with developers' long lead times. Start building, optimizing, analyzing, and start growing faster. Don't take my word for it. You can sign up for free today and start building the web visually with Builder.io. Cool. You know, gotta get paid, right? Like, gotta keep this podcast going. So yeah, shout out to folks at Builder, and this is actually an interesting transition for this too, because I want to bring up a tweet that kind of went crazy, back and forth, and as viral as I've seen in a while. So let's take a peek here. So this tweet went out by Ryan Florence, who is creating Remix along with other people. And as we go down, we see Misko, who's kind of creating Quick along with the team at Builder.io, and Steve at Builder.io talking about like hydration. But the big question up here was, what's the best partial hydration demo? And Ryan, you got involved kind of right in here and started kind of comparing like Marko to Remix. And I think here's the other one. There was like our rewritten version. Here we go. And I was wondering, and hopefully I don't put you too much on the spot here. I think you have these demo sites up, and I wanted to just talk about the performance differences as we go through this. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. That thread was a tricky one because I was trying to not jump into it right away. Some of those comments, even the Builder ones, came later. Like essentially, the very beginning was, here's a part. Give me a demo of partial hydration. And when you say that, most people like in the know, the few people who know of Marko were eventually like, oh, Marko, like instantly started like showing demos and stuff, and some of the stuff I'd created and passing them on to the Remix guys. And the problem is they're simple demos. It was a demo of a Hacker News page. Right. Like it's mostly static. And Ryan Florence was like, well, I mean, this is a really simplistic demo. This isn't a great demo. Show me something bigger. I go to ebay.com and I see piles and piles of JavaScript loaded in it. And it's like, yes, because unfortunately, there's the part that Marko renders, which is like the core page. And then there's like megabytes of ads, like just, so like that isn't always the best example. But the thing was,
use Partytown for that, folks.
yeah. Partytown looks really interesting. The challenge with that was I was still leaving alone because I know like it's one of those things where you don't have to worry about it until you have to worry about it. Like if you got a small framework, especially Sveltes and the solids of the world, like you're going to have small JavaScript payload. It's going to hydrate pretty well, and the demos might, most demos and benchmarks are a little bit convoluted to make a point. Yeah. And essentially, but then Ryan posted that image with the 3 examples side by side, and he took his Hacker News demo that he'd posted in his Remix article, and then obviously the Marko one, and it showed Mark 1 loading a dip slower and whatnot. And I was like, oh, okay, I need to explain this on 2 parts. First of all, they're using a different API, so it's like not even hitting the same endpoints. So like it's not even the same. The data loading characteristics for this have the biggest impact. And the second thing, though, what was hard to tell with that demo was it's just showing page load time. It's not talking about hydration. Hydration isn't how fast your page loads. It's how long it takes for the JavaScript to be interactive. So he showed that the Remix API that they're hitting endpoint is a different API, is a faster API. That's all it showed. It had nothing to do with hydration, because hydration isn't about how fast your page shows up. So I was like, oh man, this is bad because it's like misleading, right? Like, because this has no relevance to the conversation. in my mind. So this is what led me to going, okay, fine.
And just for clarity, before we get too far, like Remix is kind of a newer React-based library, for lack of a better term, almost similar to Next.js, right?
Yeah, and Remix honestly is we love Remix on the Marko team. Just a side note, and also Solid, because it's supporting kind of progressive enhancement, like a lot of the baseline stuff on the web. And the crazy thing is, you've been able to do that in React and any framework for years and years and years, but no one until Remix has actually gone and, well, not no one, there's been a few stray libraries, but no one have like as much weight to actually make this the pattern for their framework. So this is like a really good thing for web development and for people who have different devices and whatnot. So Remix is incredibly powerful, but the challenge obviously is Remix is a React framework. There's certain features that React doesn't have, and React's even working on them to a certain degree if you consider server components of streaming coming React 18. But Remix is kind of they have the ability to support future React, but they also kind of took a kind of stance maybe about a year ago or something. So, and they're like, we love React we have right now. We'll just build a framework on reactive TA, and maybe we don't need what React's shipping. Maybe we don't need suspense. Like, they don't use that. Like, maybe we don't need streaming. Maybe we don't need server components. We can do exactly what we want with React today. And that's partially where this conversation comes from, because they're like, convince me that I need this other stuff that's coming.
So does it kind of, like, when we do all of these comparisons like this, is it as straightforward? Like, even, let me bring this back up. Like, even when we finally got down to this and like we were looking at Marko and Salad and Remix, it's like, is this really like, do I care about this 0.1 at the end of the day, right?
No, and this, yeah, I mean, this was like, yeah, this 0.1 was nothing really, and the point is, the problem is to emphasize the actual performance difference of some of these technologies in streaming partial hydration. You just need a more substantial benchmark. It's not that it doesn't exist, which some people in the thread were suggesting. You need something that's like exaggerated. Like when in the JS framework benchmark, the one where at the beginning where I showed Solid was like 5% slower than vanilla JS, we create 10,000 rows. like I don't like. You shouldn't be creating 10,000 rows in a list. You should be using windowed, virtualizing, but maybe you can approximate that to a large page, but even that's beyond that, because even large pages, you probably shouldn't be getting above 20,000 elements. And like 10,000 rows in that benchmark is probably like 50,000 elements. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not realistic. But because of the ask, if you go back further up that thread, I was like, okay, fine. There's a comments page on here where someone went to React, or some React post, and it had like 1,400. See, you have all the demo links here if you want to go to the ones that Brian Florence used.
Oh yeah, that's right. Okay.
But the thing is, these demos that you see here are all going to be basically the same. Like the 0.1 he measured that one time is whatever, right? But like, the thing is, I went to that page that has 1,400 comments on React, and the thing is, this page is stupid, because why are you loading 1,400 comments with React, right? Like right. Or any front end framework. But the thing was, with the 1,400 comments loaded on the page, you can see the difference between streaming and partial hydration and not having them. And that was the if you do go further back up, we can show. Yeah,
I was trying to find that one here. I'll leave it on screen so we can actually find it.
Yeah,
together.
It was the one that you were showing earlier. Yeah, these two.
Yeah, okay.
These two. The first one's on mobile, and if you see it's color when it's visual, and it goes gray when it's done hydrating.
Yeah.
So
the TTI on this is what, like, everyone measures. That's the point it turns gray, right?
Yeah. And if you
it's like double.
Yeah, and if you look at it, even in terms of loading profile, not only the hydration is shorter in Marko, like, it's done before you even see anything in Remix. And these are the same demos. This is not like caching or any secret. This is literally the same page, just as is. And like on mobile, because the network is their constraint, you're not going to see streaming. It's just going to kind of all come in when it comes in. But if you look at the desktop example, the second one here, what you see is Marko shows the header right away, then shows the content, and then grades. really quickly. And the reason I wanted to show that is because if I have crap loading indicator in my demo, sorry, like it's just the header. But while we were showing that header, we could have had like a nice like Twitter bird, like, you know, like,
or the fancy grays, right?
So on the desktop, I think that's even more jarring difference, because you can actually that it's very quick to see how Marko in that example just shows up immediately and could have nice loading state, and then it loads in and it hydrates almost immediately after. Because on desktop you have more CPU, hydration doesn't take as long, you know. So essentially, that's on a cable modem too. Like it's a decent internet connection, and that change is still so huge. Again, stupid example. You shouldn't be loading 1,400 comments at once, but this is what happens when you have a large site. When you're building e-commerce site like eBay or you know, Amazon, you have lots of comments or item listing details and like stuff coming in from like 10 different services and stuff, and they all have different latencies. And essentially, just saying, like, there is definitely a use case where you want to be able to show some stuff sooner. It's not just loading the headers, you know, which is the thing people talk about, which lets us, you know, start loading the assets sooner. But it's also like loading stuff as it comes in. Maybe you can start loading images earlier. You can start loading like actual pieces of the rendering. And this sort of progressive approach, kind of the beautiful part is that at worst, it's basically the same as block to render like Remix does. But at best, you can get experiences almost the same as like Jamstack feeling, where you get this instant response from the server and the data loads in, except you get to start fetching the data sooner, like on the server. It's basically as close as you can get to best of all worlds. Of course, there is a catch, because when you stream, you have to return the status code right at the beginning. So there's challenges there and new paradigms to come. But from a pure performance perspective, it's awesome to have a solution that literally just scales across the whole spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's dive in a little bit to Solid.js itself. I was waiting until we could make a little segue here, but asking for the Hacker News discussion. So Hacker News kind of came up last night or yesterday. I think this came out, and it's talking about Solid.js feels like what I always wanted React to be, right? And so it's a fun little comment thread to like read through for sure. And I'm sure you're dealing with a lot of it still today. So luckily we had this podcast, or unluckily for you, I don't know. Maybe
No,
you needed a break.
it's actually really good. I actually tweeted about this after I saw it posted. I was comfortable going to bed last night. Sometimes when this happens, I get like the Hacker News things always seem to break at like 10 p.m. at night, and then I'm like, oh crap, I'm gonna be up all night. I'm gonna be like trying to respond to people and not make misconceptions. But there's a lot of neutral stuff. There's a few negative ones, but a lot of positive stuff too. This is a big shift. People, there's always going to be like 30% of the comments that have nothing to do with the article, where someone's arguing about hooks or arguing about how they like Java, or
Yeah.
vanilla JS. You can make it like a bingo scorecard to kind of check off in terms of the type of comments you get. But on the whole, people kind of pointing out ecosystem, it's not as big, and people are talking about real issues and talking about real things as a result of this article, which made me excited, because in the past in Hacker News, it's been more of like, I've been called a lot of funny things, like basically like in it to get the fame, or what, like somebody wants to be hired by Fang, or like just like essentially stuff like that. I'm just like, no, I'm just making a framework. I've been doing this for like 5 years, but this one,
that can be frustrating. So I think at the core of the article, though, like there's some really good callouts as far as Solid goes. So I think probably the most prevalent example that I've ever seen done, which happens all the time, I would say, now that we're kind of using hooks so much more, this set count, where count +1, where count is already kind of the state out here, right? This highlights, if I go down, so this counter starts bouncing all over the place.
Maybe not on this one, but the initial one, if you forget to put the array in, it goes crazy. Yeah.
And so essentially we're trying to like re-add a counter to the original state plus add one, and that state carries through, and it gets really like hard as a programmer, especially like if you're a newer dev when this is happening. You're like, what is going on? And good call out here. This is kind of the form that I always recommend using. If you have to do cleanup another way, that's fine too. But anytime you're using state like that, like use a functional piece. So you're passing that value through the function and then actually updating it. So
yeah, the challenge runs deeper than this, though. Actually, it's funny that because if you're using props, it's not just the local state. You any kind of new variable in the closure has potential to have this this problem. Although most people are better about that kind of scenario, but because in terms of props, can be used to like it re-rendering everything conceptually maybe. But props, and it's not just like the functional thing gets you out of most things, but then once you try and abstract it into another hook, you now like a use interval, you now have to consider stuff like that. And that's why Dan Abramoff wrote a really, really good article where I think it's like a 15-minute read where he literally goes through how to make use interval in React. And to be fair, I've used this example. My first public talk that I did on Solid.js was actually basically this article. It was at React Finland last September, and so I'm very familiar with this example because it is a good way of illustrating the conceptual differences, even though I might argue that everything React does actually makes sense for React, and we might not should be so critical of it. But I definitely, I mean, this is one of the reasons reactivity is great, because it kind of like stuff like this just comes much more naturally.
Yeah, for sure. So here's kind of the difference on Solid, and maybe you can start to break down, and I'll bring up the Solid docs and we can talk about it too. But the kind of core difference here is this count being a function on the Solid side. Can you talk more about like what does that actually mean for Solid and how Solid uses it?
Yeah, the key thing to Solid in terms of execution is we wrap not every expression granularly, but generally it's easier in your head to think of it that way. We wrap each expression that changes independently. So in order to track it, though, we have to know what it depends on. Essentially, this idea of like if you have a count in your DOM and you want it to update some text, you need to know that this text in the specific location depends on that count. And the way we do that is through generally function calls, but it could be a proxy, basically some way of intercepting accessing it. So at any point where we access that value, then we can go, oh, in this execution scope, wherever it's running, it cares about this value. It's very similar to some state libraries in React, like Jotai and like, was it Veltio? I can never say it right. MobX even, where they look at where stuff's used, but the difference is they just re-render the whole component and whatever comes downstream of that. And in Solid, we just focus on the very specific locations, the bindings, to do that pinpoint update, like the text in that div. And so in order to make sure that we access everything in the right place, everything's kind of lazily evaluated, is my best way of putting it. And that's why they're functions. Essentially, you don't want to access count ahead of time, because then it's much further away from where we use it. If you can get that as close as possible to where we use it, that means the least amount of work we have to do.
And essentially, on the Solid.js side, can you talk about the differences in React for like useEffect and how that works on Solid.js?
Yeah, the thing is, this automatic tracking means we don't need dependency arrays. And in fact, it's more powerful than not needing dependency arrays, because someone will point out to you, they'll be like, oh, well, there'll be a compiler someday that compiles in the dependency arrays, sure. But it's not about that. It's actually that the dependencies are dynamic. They can actually change on the fly based on what is required and what is used. Maybe that's hard without like visualizing it, but essentially at any point, any effector, I call them computation, knows what data it depends on, and at that point in time, so it knows that it needs to change at that point in time. That means if there's conditional logic in your effects and stuff like that, we can actually, based on the current state of the app, know exactly what changes matter. Like if you're showing, say, someone's full name, this is a terrible example, it's the one that everyone uses, on the screen, and you change the last name, well, you need to update and change the full name because the last name depends on it. But if you had some way of toggling it, like changing so that you only showed the first name and not the full name, at that point, if you're showing the first name, if you go and update the last name, nothing needs to run. And that's like a huge difference in terms of execution too. I mean, it's not the biggest on performance because, shallow diffing and stuff. I mean, I'm getting a little technical on that, but generally speaking, just on the whole concept of what actually reruns, it's just very granular. It's like only what needs to rerun. And this is a big departure, right? But it's
like alternatively in React, you're basically re-rendering the entire tree at that point, right?
Well, or at least a subsection of the tree from that point downwards. And you can use memos and smart ways, and you can build a compiler perhaps that memoizes everything. But like in Solid, that just kind of happens because the granularity is kind of built in. So like I enjoyed that. I mean, React Forget came out, and there was that whole discussion. And then I rebuilt the demo using some technology. I actually copied Vue. Vue has a very similar reactive system to Solid, except it feeds into a VDOM like React. And I copied the example, and I was like pretty happy with it. I'm like, yeah. And Evan was like, look, no fancy compiler. We can just do this, right? I'm like, yeah, no fancy compiler. We can do this. And then I looked at the example, and I was like, we still have that computed in Vue, or that create memo in Solid. And I was looking at it, and I was like, no, this example doesn't even need a memo. And I just removed the whole memo that started the whole conversation, and it still worked granularly. So that's kind of one of the differences. It's just like innately designed to kind of solve that problem without any like special compiler. You can argue that the JSX is a special compiler, but that's not the same as the runtime reactivity. It's just like the JSX is only special because of for two reasons. Because obviously we generate real DOM nodes, so there's some benefits to being able to like do some DOM specific stuff on the compilation output for the native elements, like the lowercase tags, like the divs. And the second thing is that our component props get a little transformed to do lazy evaluations. They become functions essentially. So even though you don't see it because we use getters, essentially we just have to do a little extra wrapping. But beyond that, Solid's components, like the actual components themselves, are just functions. So it does have that sort of in common with JSX or like VDOM libraries, and that the component costs are very, very low because you're just calling these functions.
Yeah, I think I just want to dive back. We went kind of in a little bit of a circle here, but I just want to come back to this. And another part of Solid.js, when we start talking about, if you were to see this specific example in React, where this has this console log, anytime that counter update occurred, you would see, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm terrible at React, you would see this console log multiple times, like usually 3 times, right?
I mean,
each time.
Yeah, it depends on what the setup. I think actually for this example, it wouldn't be that bad. I mean, there are situations. There's the problem with React in terms of the side is there's a couple things. Just like some libraries, there's a use strict which runs everything like twice anyways, and then like so like by the end of it, you might have multiple. I think for this one.
This isn't a quiz, by the way. You just trust us. You'll see it more than once.
Yeah.
On the Solid side of things, though, Solid understands the fact that count is a function within itself, and that's the only thing that's changing, right?
Yeah.
So every time this set interval actually updates set count, and you'll notice on this example, folks, we don't have useEffect in here like React would. So that's another difference to call out here. But this function right here where the count is count, and it's returning that value that's currently in the count, do I say state at that point? Sure. That's what's kind of being updated. And you won't get this like reactive tree re-render piece that will throw out this console log multiple times.
Yeah. I mean, Solid will run that log only once.
Right.
React will run it at least once every update cycle. So every time the count ticks, it will keep on console logging out. There is something missing in this demo that sometimes, like I love fairness and equal comparison here, and I think that sometimes when we do this, and a lot of stuff around Svelte is all equally guilty, or maybe more guilty of this, where they kind of just go, oh look, it's let count and done, is that there is one piece missing. This example does not have cleanup in it, And I think that's unfair characterization, because if the counter ever got unmounted here, that interval is going to still keep on going on forever.
Okay.
So there should be what's missing in that code is an on cleanup call. We have in React, when you create effects, it returns a function that's a cleanup. In Solid, because the way the whole thing's architected, we just have an on cleanup call, and it has nothing to do with components, which probably is a bit of a mind thing. But the reason is, essentially, we need to be able to register on cleanup anywhere during the synchronous execution, because technically in Solid, everything is just nested effects. Like, it's a different mental model. React, you have this kind of pure execution that outputs, data state in whatever, and outputs this VDOM that gets diffed and patched and updated. And along the way, you kind of register these side effects, these hooks, as components re-render. So you have your useEffect and whatever. On Solid side, so you didn't need the useEffect, but technically that's because the whole component rendered is kind of seen as Solid's version of the effect, in which it only reruns when it needs to. And in the case of our component that's mounted top level, it never needs to, right? And I think, but if it was conditional, something above it changed, well, then it's possible that it needs to be unmounted or needs to change. And at that point, those cleanup things that you register need to be run. So Solid has an on cleanup, because technically that on cleanup can be run top level in a component, can be run inside an effect, because it's all just the same thing. I think this is again, it's one of those visualizing things. I think it's always kind of hard when you show people like Solid with React, when I kind of decompose it into like a bunch of nested create effects, they're just like, what? But it actually just kind of works. It means that components aren't the thing that you scale with so much as like the structural dynamicism, like conditionals and loops. That's where the loading points are. If you think about it for a moment, if you don't have something above conditional, you're never going to unmount something. So that's really where all the cleanup happens, at the points like when you conditionally render something or you iterate over loops. That's the only place where we actually need a new context. We don't need to bring this new kind of context in at every component. And that's one of the overheads that a lot of reactive libraries have, and that I intentionally avoided with Solid, was this idea that we needed to make every component an observer. It's a performance thing, but yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to show just the last piece of this, and then we'll jump over to our Purrfect Picks and kind of do some Q&A. So this is kind of the final example that we have out here from Nick, and it's got this piece, which is super intriguing to me. So we've got console log for a DOM update A, and the only thing in here is false. And then the count one, which is this DOM update B, and this is all one div block, which still blows my mind a little bit. You will get DOM update A one time, and as that counter goes, you will get update B, update B, update B, which that's the magic, if you ask me, in the whole thing.
Yeah, it's surprisingly unique. I mean, reactivity, like everyone makes those examples, like if you use MobX or Solid, like where you kind of like just update what changes, you console log something. But like Knockout kind of did this a bit back in the day, but almost no modern library actually applies reactivity to the actual like view updates. They kind of put it into a component level system or a VDOM or some other level. And yeah, I mean, how do you, like, at least from a performance standpoint, like how do you match that, the ability to just like literally go, oh, that text node now, and that example is great, because that's the only way I can ever show it. It was that was the problem I had with the React Forget demo that I made too. I was like, how do I show that things aren't changing when they're not changing?
Right.
But the thing is, this extends because of what I mentioned before with the components, like the props getting kind of wrapped in getters and all the way down. It doesn't matter. You break your component up into 12 components, prop drill through the whole tree, use context. It doesn't matter. At the end, because it's all lazily evaluated, you're going to end up somewhere down in the tree a div that is reading that context, reading that store, and it goes, okay, I'm going to execute. And sure, it might call in a couple extra function wrappers up the tree, but essentially it will find that signal no matter where it is, because it's runtime. And then it'll go, okay, I care when this one changes. And then if somewhere else in the tree, someone goes, okay, I've updated this one value, then it's almost like laser beam straight to that one, not just component, that one text node in the DOM, and go, okay, you update your text. Doesn't
Nice.
matter. 12 components, one text node updated.
So I'm kind of curious. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask a question about Quick. How similar like does Quick correlate with that update? Is that like the HTML would occur and then as it needed updated it would load the JavaScript required, whereas Solid would already have it?
Yeah, I mean, Quick has kind of been optimized for this lazy loading case, and I think it's interesting because obviously when things get large enough, you do want a lazy load. But in general, with Quick, if you it's aware of the component level dependencies at least, right? It's not as fine-grained. It has a fine-grained reactive system, but it's not as fine-grained in the rendering, at least currently. There's been discussions about that.
Sure.
But
we're in alpha. We'll get there.
but one of the things is like essentially it will just register to say this component needs a change, kind of similar to Vue is probably similar, MobX plus React. So somewhere else you basically update that, and then it'll go, okay, this component cares about it. Load the code we need for that component at that time. Now, obviously, there's a delay with lazy loading stuff. So in some cases with Quick, you will want to preload it and bundle appropriately to do that. But yeah, essentially, once Quick is in the browser, today it's basically a VDOM with a fine-grained reactive system feeding into it. So it's, as I said, very similar to Vue.
Cool. That makes sense, totally. So folks that are watching on YouTube, feel free to throw your questions in. We're going to do a quick Purrfect Picks piece where we just do fun picks for the day. And hopefully we can get to Q&A after for all your questions. So I'll go first because I know I put Ryan on the spot before we started if he had any fun picks. So my first one, which is probably one he'll be happy with, is Solid Hack. I didn't know this was going on. I should probably follow Solid.js Twitter feed a little more or something. But there's this cool competition going on with Solid, and there's 37 days left. Apparently builders also organize or a partner, I don't know, giving away something as well. So there's a competition. Basically, you're building your own cool site using Solid.js, and there's going to be, was it 12,000? Yeah, here it is.
Yeah.
$12,000 to give away for projects. So that's my first Purrfect pick because that sounds awesome. My second one, which we were kind of just talking about a little bit, is Ryan and Misko kind of talking about Quick, and you guys broke it down better than even when Misko was on here for the pod. So it was pretty amazing. I think part of that is probably how far Quick's made it in the last 6 months too. So there's a lot going on there, but great talk between the two of you. Ryan, did you have any Purrfect pick you wanted to show off or talk about?
I mean, I'm just gonna throw this out here. This is like completely off topic, but you were mentioning like TV shows or stuff you watched recently. It's like yeah. I'm like super stoked that science fiction and fantasy and stuff has been coming in. Like this fall was great. With stuff like, even if it's like not the best adaptations, things like Wheel of Time, Foundation, even the new Dune movie. I've been like, see, but I'm just a sci-fi guy at heart, and I liked a lot of. Almost like cheesy 90s comedy kind of sci-fi type stuff, and some of Joss Whedon's earlier work. And I've been watching Resident Alien with Alan Tudyk, and it, honestly, maybe not everyone's cup of tea. It's just it's a comedy, but I've always been a big fan of the actor. He was in Firefly back in the day. It's on I believe Sci-Fi, and it's on its second season. But yeah. That's him in the blue with a blue background. But yeah, like it's just a dumb comedy, but I don't know.
I have to ask, did you watch Fringe when it was out?
Yeah, I watched all of Fringe. Yeah,
I loved Fringe. And
yeah.
To your Dune comment, I can't wait for the second Dune to come out. I feel like it's only a part of what's happening.
For me, seeing Foundation was big. Isaac Asimov's my favorite author for all time. I've been rereading his books, and actually I'd never read a couple of them. Is from his Empire series, and I got them for Christmas, and I've been rereading them. So I guess that's my second pick. It's old. You can tell it was written in the 1950s, but he has this a way with his writing that's so clever. The TV show diverted from it, which is fine, because I felt like it's almost impossible to make Foundation into any kind of long-running media because there's a collection of short stories, and they've kind of somehow pulled it off in a show that's good in its own right. But generally speaking, Asimov is what got me into science fiction, I guess. I was already reading some fantasy stuff, but just he just so much cleverness in the writing and the thinking. He just makes things like seem obvious after the fact, and he makes the reader feel clever for reading it and figuring it out and stuff. So I'm a big fan of that.
Cool. So quick Q&A. Hopefully we have time. Ryan, you still have some more time, I hope?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm going to butcher this name, but Abidi, I think, says, please tell us about Solid Start.
Yeah, no, I've been working on this. And the funny thing is these things kind of are moving targets. Essentially, this is a meta framework, first party, built by people working on solid core team, active community, people in the community, to build a meta framework like SvelteKit or like Remix or like Next. And I started it last February. But the truth of the matter is, like, this was in the plans for a while. Sort of. I was intending to make the pieces and hope someone else made it. And then at a certain point, I realized that just wasn't practical. SSR is hard, and putting all the right pieces together with the right defaults is hard. And the reason why these meta frameworks exist, the reason why they're able to raise money and make businesses out of them. So yeah, Solid Start is something that we've been working on. We've been looking around. Like, we had an idea. We knew it was going to be nested routing, parallel fetching. This was going to be core of that. I use that on all my old client demos. I brought it into SSR. This is kind of the basis. But because of that, Solid Start is actually really similar to Remix, even though they weren't actually initially inspired by each other. But now that I've seen Remix, I'm like, oh god, these guys have great ideas. So there's a lot of Remix in there. There's a bit of SvelteKit. I've just been taking kind of the best pieces that I like of those frameworks and making one that is made for Solid, essentially, is the idea. We just added progressive enhanced forms last night, in fact. I just merged a PR. So now we have like forms very similar to Remix in it. We also have the docs are pretty sparse, and they were actually forked off the Remix docs. That's how close certain things are right now. But essentially, you just get started, and you get like a entry point for the client and the server. You get basically a file system based router, and then we don't have loaders. We have something called data functions, which are isomorphic, which is actually more similar to, I guess, SvelteKit, but it's basically using the built-in mechanism for loading that's built into the router. And then we've introduced some really cool things like type-safe RPCs as a way of like doing server calls, and we can extend those for different functionality. Essentially, we can use them as API endpoints. We can use them as directly as RPCs. We can use them for forms. We can use them for lots of uses, and that's kind of like the basis. But it's all just built off Vite plugins. It's strongly housed in Vite.
Nice. So yeah, Alexandre says the Discord. Just go out to their Discord. If you can't find it, it's on SolidJS' site.
Yeah.
Another question from Patrick. So it says Ryan showcased a Marko versus Quick Hacker News example, and he showed that Marko only downloads 240K versus Quick 330K. How does Marko cut off the extra KBS?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the demo was. I actually think the change was bigger than that, because if I remember correctly, I think it was Marko was 240, Solid was like 400-ish, and Quick was about 500. And the reason is that partial hydration, and this is like, I mean, we could get to Quick versus Marko and like that at some point, and maybe that'll be on my stream this Friday. I'm having the guys from Marko on my stream this Friday,
nice.
The rest of the team. But essentially, when you know for certain what is on the server and what is in the browser 100%, which is that's a difference. Quick is based on lazy or progressive hydration, this idea of like only load what needed, and if you never need it, you never need it. It makes it kind of simple on that side. Marko's based on knowing exactly which components are server and which are client. It's kind of like React server components in that sense, but the difference is Marko's compiler automatically figures this out for you. So like Quick, it's automatic. You don't have to worry about it. And the reason that Marko is so small in that example is because when you know that you're fetching the data on the server and you know that it never gets re-rendered in the client, well, you don't need to serialize it. So when you have 1,400 comments, again, stupid number of comments, and the only client-side interactivity is collapsing them, essentially, You need JavaScript to do that, and it's nested too. So it's not simple JavaScript. You actually need to like have comments and comments that nest, and you need to be able to hydrate it. But if you don't know for certain what's on the server or client, you still have to serialize data because there's some potential you might need to lazy load it. And because Marko knows that it never needs to lazy load it, not only does it do the minimal amount of hydration, it actually knows that it doesn't need to serialize or send any of the data in that state. And this is something similar that React Server Components are leveraging too. And this is a huge savings. That's a big part of why the thing's so fast to load. Like in that demo where I show Remix against Marko, to be fair, not really anyone's on the Marko side. Like if you brought Solid, it would be about the same as Remix there. If you brought Quick, even, it would be about the same as Remix there. The difference on that example is all about data serialization. The hydration cost difference between Marko and Remix is like, on like the desktop, for example, is like 30 milliseconds versus 50 milliseconds. It is close to twice. And in the Quick case, the hydration would be 0 milliseconds initially. So, but you already spent like a second and a half sending the data across on the network, and Marko's already like shaved half the time. It's shaved like 700 milliseconds. It's essentially like there's just advantages on the double data side when you know on the partial hydration, and advantages on the hydration side. So it kind of leverages both pieces when you have that knowledge. Is probably my best way of putting it.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool. Well, I think we're at a full hour, and I've quizzed you like completely, Ryan. So I think all I can say is thank you. I really appreciate it. One last comment. I meant to say this at the start of the pod. Brittany's not with us. She couldn't make it today. So normally we have an extra host as well. But thank you, Ryan, for joining. And maybe we'll have you on once this Solid thing takes off, perhaps.
Yeah. Solid Start is going to be exciting when we get this meta framework going. So yeah, I think people will want to check it out again at that point, because we'll have a nice SSR story. And
awesome.
That's next couple, look forward in the next month or so to go into beta. That's when you probably start looking at it. It'll be stable enough.
Cool. Well, hopefully we can have you on again then.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
Ryan. Have a good one.
Thank you.